Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Mehdi and to my friend Michael Suker and Carly Wool-Gilbert, who I think's just popped out. It's wonderful to see Carly here. I'll be brief, and I apologise for my stay, but my son and I were at a fun run this morning, and so I had a shower in a can and threw myself together. I think, Mike, to follow on from Michael, I am not just a participant in democracy, we all are here, but also someone who studies it and taught it. I taught constitutional law when I was practicing as a lawyer back at university. And there's two things I'd just like to leave you with as a discussion. There's the culture of democracy, and that includes the aspiration and desire of it. But then there's the boring structural parts. And too often we've seen in history where the passion and fire from a revolution or a movement which has those goals descends into swapping one power system for another. Indeed, you could argue maybe that's what happened in Iran in 1979. And so turning your mind to the structures of democracy is extremely important. And I think the lessons from an Australian perspective are ones that should be considered. For this reason, above all else, except for perhaps New Zealand and one other country, Australia's the longest continuing democracy in the world. Because democracy isn't the natural order of how humans govern each other. Power tends to concentrate, people tend to divide, and when there isn't a place for people with different views, the system collapses. So, yes, democracy is a forum for legitimate expression of a majority's view, but more than that, and more important, it is a place where those who are in the minority feel like there's a place for them too. Because if democracy is just winner takes all, it always collapses. It's just another form of concentration of power. So to the structures that I would like to just leave you to think about is a horizontal and a vertical view of democracy. Kylie, I just gave you a shout out at the start. It's lovely to see you here. Sorry. No, you're right. I was just talking about there's the passion of democracy and the culture of it, but there's the boring structural parts. So there's two structural parts to Australia's democracy that I think are worth considering anywhere in the world. The first is horizontal separation of powers. Separation of powers between the executive, the parliament, and the judiciary. These are not dry academic concepts. They are essential to power not being concentrated, and you've heard the adage that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so to have that thoughts into how they work is really, really important. I don't think a democracy can survive without those three branches being divided. I'm not here to give you a lesson on how that occurs, but that is the essence of our democracy. Now, we are a constitutional monarchy as our democracy, but it is fundamentally a parliamentary democracy. So our executive comes from the parliament and it's accountable to the parliament. So Michael and I are members of the House of Representatives, but the executive then is drawn from the House of Representatives and the Senate. So we're often called a Washminster system, and that's a combination of the Washington United States system, but also the British Westminster system, hence Washminster. So I think we're the best of both worlds. But the other bit, other than the horizontal separation of powers, is the vertical separation of powers. And I think this is probably the most important. When I reflect, I'll give you an example. When I reflect on Afghanistan, I spent a lot of my life there. Friends of mine were killed in Afghanistan. And when I saw how it all ended, I shared a view that many do, is what was that all for? It ended up where it started, and particularly for women and girls in Afghanistan. And I turned my mind as a postgrad student in the same university that Kylie went to in England, and I wrote a few papers on reflecting on that. And what was quite clear to me was that all this money and effort was put into the war machine and some efforts in governance and some token schools that were put up in Kabul, but almost no effort was put into the structures of democracy. And if we had, and if NATO had, and if almost no effort was put into the structures of democracy. And if we had, and if NATO had, and if the United States coalition had, I think it would have been a different story. And for those of you who haven't been to Afghanistan, like many other countries, people are different depending on where you go to. It's like Queenslanders aren't like us here in Melbourne. And that's why a federation is a really important part of democracy. A federation is that vertical separation of powers where people who think differently, have different histories and cultures and traditions, they can live their lives how they want, but then they come together for the important things, for the affairs of state or, you know, and there's broad things we agree on, but otherwise you do you. So Queenslanders aren't like us. So like those from Kabul are not at all like those from Kandahar. But instead, Afghanistan had this winner-takes-all system that whoever controlled Kabul controlled everything. And what it meant was that you had minorities felt like there was no place for them. And the only course of action for them was to fight back and take total control again. So it leads to perpetual conflict. So my plea in trying to work out, you know, a secular, democratic, free Iran, and that's what we all want, the world desperately needs that. Don't avoid the serious conversations about the structures of the democracy from a horizontal and a vertical level. And I think a country as big as Iran, there is a place for a federation. And what you do then is you tell people who fear that, oh, people who don't share all my beliefs, there won't be a place for me there. And then you can say, no, there will always be a place for you, because in that separation of powers, you get to live the life that is legitimate for your area and your people. So there is no better example of horizontal and vertical separation of powers, I think, than the Australian democracy. And it is the best of the Washington and Westminster systems. I'm very proud of it. It's not perfect, though democracy is, but it is a conflict mechanism machine. It's a way for people to air their grievances. And in my whole life as a barrister, it was often said that, well, what is the measure of a good judge or a good system? It's that the loser felt like they had a fair hearing. And in democracy, there are always losers. Every election, there's losers. But if they felt like it was fair and there was a place for them, then the system has legitimacy and it survives. So there's great passion and enthusiasm for a better Iran, but do consider this dry, boring, structural stuff. It is everything. And, yeah, that's my contribution. So thank you for having me. No worries.